Hello, welcome, and good afternoon. This is the Free Friday webinar series from the Funka Foundation. We are going to have a brief presentation this afternoon, as we have every second Friday almost. So the webinar is automatically captioned. If you can use the closed caption button in Zoom, called CC button. And the webinar is also recorded and will be published on our website and the YouTube channel that we have adjacent to that. All the microphones are muted to avoid any background noise. And this webinar has the format of a short presentation, and then it's followed by a Q&A session. It's only 30 minutes, so brief presentation and then a short period of time for the Q&A as well. And if you would like to ask a question to the speakers, then please use the Q&A function for that. The chat is also open for any technical questions. We have a colleague who is also going to share links in the chat. Today we're going to talk about the ACT rules. And my name is Susanna Lorin, but I will leave the floor to my colleague Malin Hammarberg, who will take the first part of the session today. So Malin, take it away. You are muted.
Sorry, of course I am. It's Friday and one bullet is showing. I don't know why. So live with that. So what are the ACT rules? Well, ACT stands for Accessibility Conformance Testing. ACT rules are part of the Web Accessibility Initiative, or WAI, and why is broader accessibility work. So why doesn't just develop WCAG, but also other standards, as well as informative support documents, for example, guidance for mobile accessibility and cognitive accessibility. And the ACT rules, who sits along these support documents and are set of standardized testing rules. ACT rules are informative. That means that they are provided for guidance, clarity, and consistency in testing, but they do not set mandatory requirements and they do not determine conformance on their own. So the main purpose of ACT rules is to align how WCAG, or Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, is interpreted. Even though some rules relate more directly to semantic HTML and Viaria, the focus is on supporting consistent testing of WCAG requirements. So in practice, this means try to ensure that different tools and evaluators are checking the same thing in the same way when testing against WCAG. And it's important to keep in mind then that WCAG is often only one part of a broader legislation or standard, such as the European standard EN 31509, that covers a lot more requirements than just WCAG. So, why do the ACT rules exist? Well, they are created to solve a real problem. Different tools often give different results, so accessibility automated testing tools. And experts don't always agree. We disagree a lot. So audits can vary quite a lot, and this creates confusion, especially for organizations trying to understand if something is actually accessible. So the ACT rules defines a few key things. They define what should be tested, how it should be tested, and also what counts as pass or fail criteria. But they also include assumptions and exceptions, and this will help create a more consistent and comparable result. So who are the So ACT rules can be used in several types of testing. They do apply to automated testing, of course, because they are there for supporting the automated testing tools. They apply to semi-automated testing and also to manual testing. So there are not just about tools, they also support some human evaluation. So who are they intended for? Well, the ACT rules are mainly intended for people who build or design testing method and tools. So that includes accessibility testing tool developer, accessibility test methodology developers, and accessibility experts. For others, like web developers, content creators, or QA testers, or anyone uses accessibility tools rather than building them, it's not something you need to learn in detail, but it still kind of affects you because if it influences how tools and audits works. So how you interpret results. For example, if you use accessibility tools, it helps you understand what rules that the tools are based on and what is that tool is actually checking. It also helps you compare tools and understand why they sometimes give different results, and it makes it clearer what still needs manual review. But there are some great things about the ACT rules. First, they are transparent. The test logic is open and documented, so you can see exactly what's being checked. Secondly, they create comparable results. So if tools use the same rule, the results should be more aligned. Thirdly, they are reproducible, so each rule includes examples that show how it should behave. And finally, they are flexible. They can be used for automated checks, manual checks, or a combination of them. But it's important to remember ACT rules are not the same as WCAG, or understand that they are not the same. So while WCAG defines the requirement, the ACT rules explain how to test that requirement in a consistent way. So, for example, if the WCAG says things like the image must have an alternative text that serves the same purpose, the ACT rule can test things like whether an image has an accessible name or whether image is marked as decorative. But they cannot fully test whether the text alternative actually represents the purpose of the image. So ACT rule tests parts of the requirement, not the whole requirement. So even if ACT rule passes, you still need to use human judgment to decide whether the WCAG requirement is actually fulfilled. So I did some nice illustration. So some WCAG criteria, and not all WCAG criteria, success criteria have an ACT rule. In fact, some criteria had no rules and haven't had a rule for a long time. So for example, 1.4.1, use of color. It's been a part of WCAG since 2.0, but still does not have a corresponding ACT rule. So why is this? Well, it's because some WCAG requirements are difficult to turn into clear repetitive tests. They often require human judgment and cannot be reliably checked with standardized rules. On the other side, at the same time, other WCAG criteria do have ACT rules. Some criteria has one rule, while others have several rules that test different aspects of the same requirement, as I showed in the example with 1.1.9 image alternatives. So, some ACT rules can also relate to more than one WCAG criteria. This means that the relationship between WCAG and ACT is not one-to-one. If we go back to how WCAG relates to ACT rules, one could have several ACT rules. And because the relationship isn't always straightforward, and this is exactly one of the things that ACT version 1.1 tries to improve, they have added a distinction between two types of requirements. So we have the conformance requirements. This means that the main requirement is the rule is designed to test. If the rule fails, the requirement is not met. And then we have secondary requirements. They are related requirements that might also affected by the result, but then are not directly tested by the rule. So what else is new in 1.1? Well, the latest version of Act 1.1 was published in February 2026. And it's important to understand that this is still evolving. New rules and updates are added over time, so it's a living document. For example, some Act rules are marked proposed. This means that the rules are agreed within the Act's task force, but are not yet formally approved. It is what's largely but not fully backward compatible with version 1.0. And as I just explained, one of the key updates is in 1.1 is how rules relate to the WCAG requirements, so the conformance versus secondary requirements. Another important change in Act is that it now allows what is called subjective applicability. This means that human judgment can be used to decide whether a rule is applicable in a specific situation instead of relying on what a tool can measure automatically. This is important for things like descriptive headings or meaningful labels where interpretation is needed. And it might be able to create more rules for those human judgment criteria in WCAG in the future. But we like that it's harmonized, right, Susanna? So how does the Act rule relate to EAA?
So yes, thank you, Malin. I think I can even, maybe no, I can't. So, this is really what triggered this webinar when somebody asked about the Act rules and the European Accessibility Act. So we have the Act rules, which we have already, Malin has described, is very useful and also important. But then we have WCAG, which is of course bigger because the Act rules do not cover all the WCAG criteria, and for some WCAG criteria they cover part of what needs to be tested. So it's not the whole web content accessibility guidelines. And when you are having clients or working in, or if you have products and services in the EU selling to consumers, then of course the requirements are not WCAG, it's the EN 301549, which is an even bigger standard than WCAG. So now Act rules is really just a small part of what the EN 301549 covers. And then, of course, there is also other harmonized standards coming up to cover the EAA. So not even the 301549 is kind of enough to meet the European Accessibility Act requirements. But also there are, as we tend to say many times, there are also the requirements are actually in the Act itself. So when we talk about compliance to the European Accessibility Act, it's the annex of the actual Act that lists the requirements, both the structural, the informal, the informative, the documentation, and the accessibility and the support services, and all of that is a big kind of a holistic view on accessibility and the foreseeable use for users with disabilities that are all covered. Part of that is specified in the standard that will come out after the summer as an harmonized standard, and part of the EN is referencing WCAG, and part of the WCAG criteria are covered by the Act rules. So when the question is, can I use the Act rules for making sure that I comply with the EAA? That's kind of the wrong question, or it's kind of posed in the wrong way. It can be a help for you to select a good tool, or to make sure that your tool is testing things in a way that has been not only one developers have invented themselves, but that really is kind of accepted by many experts. So that's a good thing. But it can never be said to kind of meet everything of the EAA, or really, I mean, it can support the conformance or compliance, but it's never enough. Just as testing tools can never be enough, you always need the human judgment also there. So, and of course, this illustration is not in perfect scale. It's just to show that the rules are a smaller part of a bigger value chain or ecosystem. So what the Act rules does do, well, it does standardize testing, which is a really good thing. And to me, this means that our industry is also maturing in a way. So we don't always agree on things, as Malin said, but this is really a way to professionalize the whole accessibility industry, which is a really, really good thing. So if we can standardize the testing and the methodology, that is good and positive for everyone. It also improves consistency, provided that the tool makers and others use the rules. I don't have any statistics on how much that is done, but hopefully that will be even more successful moving forward. And it also does separate the kind of what is in the actual requirements. So the user needs are bridged by this requirement, and then the testing logic is in the rules themselves. So those are really two different ways of looking at accessibility requirements. What it doesn't, or what they don't do, it doesn't replace the human testing. Cannot replace human testing. And also it doesn't cover everything, as we have said several times, and also it cannot guarantee compliance. But still, it is a very helpful set of rules. So I think the kind of the summary of all of this, or at least our view on these questions, are all that it's not about just passing tests. So accessibility is much broader. And even though the ACT rules are a really good source and something that is an initiative that is really helpful and useful and positive for the industry, it's one part of accessibility. It doesn't cover everything. And also just the kind of technical testing part is also just one part of what accessibility really is about. Because of course, accessibility is about human needs and what is in the Accessibility Act called foreseeing the or maximizing the foreseeable use. So that is how we see that accessibility should be approached or achieved, and not solely by the testing part. So with that, I think we have reached the question part. Yes, and we have quite a few test questions. So let's see if we can try to respond to some of them. Can I or should I use the ACT rules when selecting a testing tool? Malin, do you want to respond to that?
Sorry, am I muted? Or
No, you're not muted, but I can't see you.
okay. It's when I'm sharing the screen with you and you move your mouse, I get kicked out of getting my video back. Okay, maybe. Okay.
Yes, now I see you as well. Welcome back.
Welcome. Thank you. I think it's good to understand how any testing tools, where they take how they test from. And if they then use the ACT rules, as we said, that's a positive thing because it makes the testing more harmonized, and it's easy to understand why something fails or do not fail. So I think understanding whatever testing tool you are using, where they take their requirements from, is a good thing to think about. And what they do test within that requirement and what they don't test is also good knowledge to have.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. And then we have a little bit more philosophical question. How much can the ACT rules realistically increase consistency between different accessibility testing tools and auditors? Kind of a guesswork.
I don't know. I would say it depends on every testing tool is different. They test different things. So it kind of depends on what they do test, so the pool of tests they do, but also how they incorporate those parts where manual tests are required or a human judgment is required. How do they incorporate that into their testing tools? So I can't answer. I'm sorry. It's hard for me. What do you say, Susanna?
I say that it has a potential to increase the consistency, but I do not have knowledge about how much it is used in each of there are hundreds of tools in the market and we don't know all of them by heart. And we also definitely, not all of them are transparent on what they are actually using, what tools they're using, because that's part of the business logic, I guess. So I don't know if anyone can answer that question, but I really think it has a potential. I mean, if it's being used by the majority of the big testing tool providers, then of course it has a good potential to increase consistency, and that would really be a good thing. And without having scientific knowledge, I believe it is being used by the leading market leaders, and as far as I know, but I may be wrong, it's also kind of widely accepted in the industry, and so I guess it has a good potential. But there will always be organizations using completely new ideas or other ideas, and who are not agreeing with kind of the community. So then we have the favorite question: can you recommend a testing tool? and I would like to respond that you can have a look at our. Maybe Stefan can put links to that in the chat. We have 2 webinars previously with The Best in Life is Free, I think they were called. So one is where Malin goes through the testing tools that we can recommend for web. And a second one, that was so popular that we did another one where we look at testing tools for apps. So we will not point to one tool, but we will give you an overview of the ones that we find good and that we use in our work. So, how early in the design process can ACT rules be applied, given that many rules focus on implemented content rather than design artifacts? Well,
I would say that they are mainly put there to test. It depends on how your test process look like, but as I said, the ACT rules are not for designers or developers. They're there for those who create accessibility tests, accessibility experts. So depending on how your test process looks, if you have continuous testing throughout, which we do recommend, and some of the ACT rules, I've not actually read all of them, so I want in the new version, I've gone through about half of them. I can't really tell how much you can test, but for one example, color alone has no checks, so that is something you need to test without ACT rules. So I would say that you can't really use them in the design process. I would rather just go through the usual checks you do to make sure your design is accessible.
Yeah, so I'll just putting the link to the webinar I talked about. The best things in life are free. And let's see if I can get back to the right screen and have another question. Yeah, we have quite a few questions around the connection to the EAA. I think we already talked about that. Do you see the ACT rules becoming part of market surveillance or enforcement practices under the European Accessibility Act?
Maybe. I know that the regulators do know about them and check them, but more checks are needed, as we said. So they will just be a part then, and not the entire set, as Susanna covered earlier.
Yeah, and also, I mean, it would be really good if they were used also in enforcement, because then again, it's not one industry actor, one company that kind of decides how to do things, but it's a community effort. So of course, that would be very good if it could be used like that, I think. Is there a way to know how many criteria have complete ACT rules so I can complete them for my use?
I'm not sure if any of them are fully set with ACT rules, because usually they cover small test criteria per. As you know, when we test a requirement in WCAG, they usually have several things we need to check, and some of them are more complex, like 1.3.1, the one about information and relationships. Those cover a lot of tests we need to do. So depending on the requirements, some might almost be full, but you always need that human judgment to tell if it complies in the end.
Yes. Okay, and then a question from public procurement. Could ACT rules help create more objective accessibility requirements and acceptance criteria in public procurement? not sure how that would work. It's kind of, I think in procurement or when you buy things, it's more understanding the requirements and not kind of the testing processes. But of course, if you procure the same thing, or if you need to test, you get many different proposals, and there's actually something they have built before that you can test among, then you could use tools that use the rules, but it's very indirect. So I'm not really sure if it's a good way to use them when it comes to procurement. Yeah, I think you covered this, Malin, but why are some WCAG success criteria covered by multiple ACT rules while others have little or no ACT rule coverage? Maybe we can repeat that.
Yeah, it's usually from some rules need human judgment, and they are and in version 1.0, that human judgment wasn't a part of it. So that's been added to 1.1. So I see a great potential for that moving on. But when we have that human judgment, then again, we are going into that expert doesn't always agree, right? So I think more rules will get more requirements, WCAG requirements will get rules connected to them. It's a living document and more happens, but for instance, cognitive accessibility and understanding and stuff are underrepresented right now in DAC rules.
Just as they are in the standard, not only in WCAG, but also in the EN. So the last question I think we can do today, how do ACT rules ensure that accessibility testing remains focused on actual user needs rather than becoming a checklist exercise?
Yeah, so when we test things, we always need to combine several different tests. I think automated tests are excellent for getting a quick kind of state of how the accessibility is. They are good at finding technical things, and there the ACT rules are really strong. But we also need to do manual testing because things might not be detectable, or they use a different technology than it's covered in the ACT rules. So we always need to do manual testing. And then we also always talk about user testing, that we always need to make sure that it's actually usable and works with the user. So there are 3 parts of testing. So I would say take ACT rules for what they are. They support the automated testing tools, but they are not everything.
Okay, and we also got a comment here that automatic testing tools can submit their ACT rule implementation. So there is a link. Maybe if I can manage to copy it, I can even put it in the chat. So there is a way for tool makers to provide information about how they are applying the ACT rules. So that is also a part of the transparency. So thank you for that comment. So I put it in the chat. So thank you for that. We didn't go through all the questions as usual, but we need to wrap up. So do I still have control over this? Yes, I do. So we are now going on summer vacation together with the dog, it looks like. I think this is Malin's dog. So we do focus on our staff having a good time. So that means that we also have long, wonderful vacations. And that means that we will not see you for a while because we are in different parts of Europe and we have summer vacations in different times. And in 2 weeks, there's a midsummer, which is the most holy day, at least for Swedes. So that is impossible. And then we're all off sailing or whatever we are doing. So you will have to live without the Friday webinars during the summer, but we are back again on the 21st of August with very engaging topics. And we have on request, we have one of the leading persons in the accessibility world as one of our guest stars in the first one that goes in September, I think. And we also on request will have prolonged webinars where we will present our research results because people tend to think that we do that less these days. So we will also talk about all our exciting research projects. But we will be back after the summer holidays, and until then, Do read our newsletters and follow us on LinkedIn if you're interested in what we are doing. There is still activities happening during the summer. Don't forget that these webinars are also possible to use for your credits if you have an IAAP certification. And with that, we would like to wish you all a very good summer. Don't forget to have your ice cream. Thank you, Malin, for today. And thanks, everyone. Have a good summer. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.